I want to welcome Agile XRM to the podcast. I've known the people at Agile XRM for the past 12 years. I've seen how their business process management tool can add massive value to complex organizational processes in sectors such as finance and government. If you have complex processes or a need for dialogues on the Power Platform or Dynamics 365, take a look at how this BPM tool can add value. You can find them at agilexrm.com or check out the show notes for more details. Welcome to the Power 365 show, where I interview staff at Microsoft across the Power Platform and Dynamics 365 technology stack. I hope you'll find this podcast educational and inspire you to do more with this great technology. Now, let's get on with the show. In this episode, we'll be focusing on the Dataverse Connector. Today's guest is from Atlanta, Georgia in the USA. He works for Microsoft as a senior product manager for Power Automate. You can find links to his bio, any of social media, etc. in the show notes for this episode. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you on the show. I'm really keen to get a bit of your background. Now, you're in Seattle, then moved back to Atlanta, is that right?
Yep. So I just moved back to Atlanta after about 6 years working for Microsoft in Seattle. Great to have that flexibility to keep working from home, to move back. And yeah, just got all set up back in Atlanta and closer to family and things, closer to home.
Nice. So just on that front, what do you do outside of Microsoft? What do you do for entertainment? You know, what food are you into in Atlanta? And yeah, anything about your family?
Definitely. Well, for about the past year and a half, I've been raising a mini Australian Shepherd. Her name is Rue, taking care of most of my time outside of work. As you can imagine, they are quite a handful. That's 2 or 3 hours a day of just activity and getting out there and training and all of that. I also have a cat named Clover. She's a small orange tabby. She's getting up there. She's aged 9. Also caring for those guys. Besides that, I do some biking and running, and yeah, definitely miss some of the bike trails and some of the scenery around Seattle, but it's great to be back in Atlanta and back in range of everything familiar here.
Yeah. What's the best thing about Atlanta?
For me, it's family. And, there's a lot, in Atlanta, everything is, depending on traffic, around a 20-minute drive away. So there's any cuisine you can imagine, even say a wider range than Seattle or some parts out there is right nearby. And, you can drive all the way up the East Coast in a day if you want. I've done the drive to New York before. It's about 13 hours. So it feels like, if you get if you get tired of anything, you can always just head up the coast or head into the Smoky Mountains or other parts of Georgia or things. So it's all not too far out of reach.
Nice. Atlanta seems to be one of those places that Microsoft used historically in the biz app space for a lot of their events, right?
Definitely. Some of the major business applications conferences have been here, and the Microsoft campus is growing. There's now, I believe, a couple thousand people based here with the new hub in Atlantic Station, and they're planning further expansion as well. And yeah, I guess it all is very familiar with me. I grew up in the area and went to Georgia Tech as well. So it's all feels very close to home to be back.
Nice. At one of those conferences, because I've attended many conferences in Atlanta over my career, and I got to shoot the largest gun I've ever shot in my life. So it was a 50 cal gun, sniper rifle, which I think every time you pulled the trigger, you spent about $12 or $13 because, each cartridge, it was amazing, but just, yeah, phenomenal experience in a gun range. I'm there.
I was going to say, it's definitely a conference experience that I have not had. I do remember one of the times I was going home from Seattle. It was, I think, around one of the conferences. So the whole plane, I was like, am I flying away from work? Because everyone on the plane seems to be from Microsoft going right back to the conference. Yeah.
Yeah, so true. I tell you, in the early days of MVP Summit in Seattle is that we used to pretty much every time we went to Summit, we would always go to a gun range because, somebody like me from my country, guns are pretty restricted. And so, to get to, with my American colleagues and get to go and fire some phenomenal hardware at the gun range was quite entertaining, which we did every time in Seattle that we went. So yeah, kind of an associate with the Microsoft event.
So my journey, I guess I'd say, I think from early on, I was always involved in, tech assistant roles or AV pieces or that type of hardware. At Georgia Tech, I studied computer science and had kind of a first internship for a company doing process automation, an RPA vendor. It's since been acquired, but kind of got to experience kind of all those aspects of solution development, right? Not just leveraging computer science concepts and stuff for their apps, but building really targeted applications for call center processes or other back office pieces, right? Where you can kind of immediately see the business value, right? And see how the workflows, if just one thing is off, you've messed up something for hundreds of people and all of that, right? So kind of moved on from some of those pieces to another internship at Microsoft, followed on to the same team from there, and spent about 4 years working on different internal teams at Microsoft, a variety of internal support tools, part of bringing our support experiences to leverage Dynamics 365 internally. So got to travel all over. Microsoft support has a very broad footprint worldwide. Got to see different sides of almost every Microsoft product, it feels like. And yeah, so got a lot of exposure there. And then about 2.5 years ago, made the switch to a more of a product role than some of those internal pieces, and switched to working on some of the Studio and UI Flows experiences in Power Automate. So that's since been rebranded to Desktop Flows, as some folks may be familiar. We've done a lot of work to make it possible not just to automate pieces in the cloud, but things on your desktop as well. So since working on some of those integration pieces, I've moved back more into some of the Dynamics and Dataverse pieces, and currently managing our Dataverse Connector, some of our Dynamics integration pieces, classic workflows, some of these other aspects that Power Automate is wrapped up with in making the Power Platform the best low-code experience it can be.
Yeah. So tell us, the Microsoft Dataverse Connector, what is it? Where does it sit in the ecosystem, and what is it commonly used for?
Yeah, so the Microsoft Dataverse Connector is Power Automate's interface for automation of Dataverse and Dataverse-backed apps. So that's Dynamics 365, our industry cloud apps, and any custom apps that you've made, in Dataverse for Teams, outside of Dataverse for Teams, where you're leveraging, any Dataverse capability, any data stored in Dataverse, and you're trying to now leverage that to integrate with other applications through the Power Automate Connector ecosystem, or simply build more advanced workflows or automated processes with those steps in Dataverse. So it's customer facing in the sense that, all of you listening depend on this very heavily, and your cloud flows and integrations with Dataverse and Dynamics 365 across the platform. But we also use it very heavily internally. So a lot of the Dynamics apps, Dynamics 365 marketing and other pieces are built themselves, or different features are built themselves on this Dataverse connector and Power Automate to build different features and things that are backed by these automation capabilities. So we serve a lot of stakeholders from that respect, but it's all in that spirit of improving Dataverse automation, making more types of automation possible through Dataverse.
Nice. So there's two connectors, right? There's an old and a new. Is the old one pretty much nobody's using it anymore, or is it still actively being used? What's the position, and why was there a transition between, without just upgrading the old? Why was there a decision around why a new connector?
Yeah, so you can think of it like with each major generation of some of the Dataverse pieces coming to be and moving from the older parts of Dynamics and everything, that as the platform has evolved, there's basically been new connectors at different phases along the way. So the Dynamics 365 connector was a much older piece of that. The Microsoft Dataverse Legacy connector is, a bit more recent with that integration. And the current connector you see now, our Microsoft Dataverse connector, is looking to build on all those past aspects, right? Expose new capabilities, new actions. And the major piece that sets it apart is that it's natively integrated with Dataverse. So the other connectors follow some of the standard paths used by other connectors in the platform, but our current Microsoft Dataverse connector is set up to actually directly connect to Dataverse. So calls are going direct without extra overhead. That means your flows run faster with less overhead than some of the past pieces. So kind of doubling down on that native integration, you may have seen Power Apps has a similar tables experience where they've natively integrated with Dataverse as well to optimize some of those experiences. That's where, as we're looking to phase out the legacy connectors, double down on investment of this connector as the primary way that you can automate Dataverse through Power Automate. And we'll get more into some of the migration questions or pieces around this later in the show, but the focus is on ensuring that you have control over moving your past flows to this connector. We don't want to break your connections, your business logic, those other pieces. So currently we have a migration assistant that can help with the migration and can help create a new copy of your flow with the dynamic schema and those actions and things migrated. But we haven't set it up to be fully automatic, fully behind the scenes, which we know would be much, much easier an experience. But at this point, we don't, because new connections are required and some of these other pieces, we want to make sure that you have full control over that migration experience at this point in time. And so you had another question on just what is the usage of the legacy connectors today? And definitely if you're using the legacy connector, you are not alone. We have many thousands of users still using the legacy connectors and still, facing migration and looking at what's needed to move from these pieces. We do see more than 95% of new flows are created with the native connector. So we've kind of hit this milestone where for most scenarios, the native connector is, the connector that works, that is adopted, that is being used. The body of migration is primarily on these past flows that have been created that we want to support you in continuing to run and move forward without interruption. And just calling out the two major capabilities we're working towards that are not yet supported in this connector are connecting to other environments besides the current environment, and the when a row is selected trigger that you use from model-driven Power Apps and from your Dynamics 365 apps. So both of those are things we're actively working on in the coming months to add support to that migration utility, and make sure everyone has a smooth experience of moving off of the legacy connectors without interruption to their current processes.
So you mentioned 95% of new flows are using the new connector. Is there any reason why you didn't make the old connector unselectable, as in for anything new? So yes, fine for legacy if it's already in play, but prevent people from using that going forward?
Definitely. And I guess part of it is because of those two scenarios I just mentioned that, there's not currently a workaround for those. You need the legacy connector today for those two scenarios. So right now, the deprecation schedule has us turning off the connector for use in new flows in March 2023. So that means searching for the connector, you will not see it in new flows by the end of March 2023, and turned off for existing flows in October 2023 at the earliest. And as an additional clarification there, if you have a flow that is imported through a solution or kind of stored, and that connector has already been added, you can continue to import those. It's really just in the flow designer when you're searching. That's the milestone for March that will be turned off first. And as I mentioned, our intent is to have support for connecting to other environments, support for the trigger when a row is selected ahead of these milestones, right, to ensure that folks don't get stuck without ways to reach those capabilities.
Yeah. So if people don't have a dependency on those two features that are yet to be added, there's really nothing stopping them upgrading now, right, to the new connector?
Yes. So we can walk through some of the steps to share in more detail if just to add clarity on some of the pieces. But if you're using the Dynamics 365 deprecated connector or the Microsoft Dataverse legacy connector, in most cases, you can go ahead and update to the Microsoft Dataverse connector, and we're working to publish, I think by the time this episode goes live, we'll have an updated documentation guide that goes through each of the parity features that I'm describing here, the migration assistant that we have, and those related steps. There are a few other limitations I want to call out. So if you're using a flow, most flows created before about June 2020 are in an older schema that we cannot yet convert using the migration assistant. So a lot of the older flows that are out there actually have to be recreated manually right now. So you can move, it just has to move to the Microsoft Dataverse legacy connector or fully recreated manually with the with the Microsoft Dataverse connector. We're working on adding support to the migration assistant so that you don't need to manually rebuild those. We understand some of the challenges there, and we want that to be as easy as possible.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the things we discussed was moving Dataverse from pro code to low code. What are you thinking about when you think about that?
Definitely. And what you see is in our Dataverse connector today, there's many aspects where you need to know internal logical names of your Dataverse entities or some of the CRM aspects, and action names are things that are less familiar. You may have built an app, customized a form, and built out a whole experience for other users in your organization, but you may not be familiar with those internal names or those pieces until you need to write a flow that connects those, right? So we recognize that adds some significant challenges just in finding the right names for things to specify. When you're doing lookups in the Dataverse connector, when you're writing filters today, you need the logical names and OData syntax for those queries, which, in most cases we see, there's ways to figure out the exact queries, but we want to make those as easy as possible. So kind of in a parallel work stream to the migration experiences and those parity features that I was talking about on the connector, we are looking to improve the usability of the connector itself. We're looking at richer lookup experiences and other controls. All those, you could almost say just the more challenging low code pieces or the less low code pieces, right? To make sure that from Power Automate, you can build automations without knowing those internal names, without knowing OData, those other pieces. Each of those is a kind of a cliff, right? You have to go learn new syntax and find those other pieces. So we're definitely looking at ways of making those as easy as possible. And I did want to call out a few resources related to that. As
awesome.
There's a just in case other folks haven't seen these, there's a great community browser extension called Level Up for Dynamics 365 and Power Apps. I can share the link with that after. And Level Up has a great overview of the internal field names over the form view of your data in Dataverse. So if you're trying to understand based on the form you've configured, just what the fields are, what syntax should be used. That's a great way to get there. In the built-in, the recently updated Power Apps table view for your data, you can view, there's a link from each row and the schema of each column to view some of the metadata from that updated page. So those are the other kind of built-in way to see internal names and for lookups and other regarding columns and things. That's the best way to find out what exactly those column names are. I'd say that or output from other actions. And if you do a list rows or a get a row action in the flow, I think I see a lot of people doing that. And the other general resource is the Fetch XML Builder community project in the Dynamics 365 toolbox. Fetch XML Builder can help you create more advanced queries, especially if you're trying to tune performance of your Dataverse queries or things, or kind of reduce the load on your cloud flows. By creating a fetch XML query, you can specify the exact columns and other filter conditions, right? More than what you can do in OData. And today, crafting those fetch XML queries, and that's where tools like the Fetch XML Builder can help you create those. That can really lighten the load on what data is being returned, and kind of help you as you develop those queries and build flows that use more specific pieces of data.
It's good. Those guys that have created those will love that you've given them a shout out, and we'll make sure we link them in the show notes for this episode just so you can jump straight to them. When we look at optimizing Microsoft Dataverse usage, what are you thinking in that area around optimization and making it a more compelling environment for people to build their solutions in?
I'd say a lot of it is the usability aspects that I was talking about, just around simply being able to use these pieces. There's other investments that we're making around streamlining licenses, discovery, finding things in context of certain apps. Just we want to make those experiences as easy as possible. But I'd say, I guess those are the main usability aspects that we'd focus on. I would, there's, just as we were speaking about cliffs and other kind of low-code pieces where, currently, there are still cases where you need to jump out and use a classic workflow or a plugin to handle certain scenarios. So I did want to highlight one area where the cliff isn't fully gone, but there has been a lot of work to make it better, is the custom API experience and our business events integration from the connector. So highlighting, I'll share a few of the links after this as well, but the custom API experience for either as part of plugins or kind of on their own, you can specify custom APIs in Dataverse for specific messages or business events, right? And in Power Automate, those can be exposed as actions in our when an action is performed trigger. And you can also invoke those actions if there's business logic behind those through the perform a bound and unbound action, depending on whether they're tied to a given table or not. But both of those are kind of our gateways to other customizations, right? Kind of at arm's reach from the flow. You can quickly tailor specific triggers, tailor specific business logic. Start, some of the things that are not as straightforward to configure directly within the flow, you can still easily make accessible to one of your flows and start extending that way.
Nice. You mentioned there classic workflows and plugins, which are, of course, been around for a long time back on Windows Workflow Foundation. Are we any closer to not needing them at all? Because, I was just with a customer recently who says they're still extensively using classic workflow and not, switching over to Power Automate. Where's your thinking at the moment in that space?
Definitely. So we definitely recognize for some of the core Dynamics usage, especially when you have millions of triggers or certain pieces, and all of your logic is within Dynamics, right? Classic workflows can be simpler to configure in some of those scenarios. Definitely acknowledge that classic workflows still have their place, and we haven't fully solved that from the Cloudflow side, right? But we are looking to make progress both on the scale aspect that I mentioned, making sure that we can support the trigger volume from Dynamics and those other pieces without disruption or things that are hard to predict. And we are looking into as well synchronous execution scenarios. There's some longer term pieces that we do want to improve that we've finally been able to make some progress on kind of I guess our planning and architecture side on those aspects. So definitely acknowledge synchronous runs, some of the wait condition aspects, and the pre-image details that are, you can have kind of more finely crafted triggers and things from certain workflows we're looking to make some of those capabilities available from Cloud Flows as well, so that you can leverage the whole connectors ecosystem. You can leverage the other Power Apps embedding and all the other improvements that come with using a Cloudflow instead of a workflow. One other piece I wanted to highlight on classic Dataverse workflows is we do have a conversion utility that we're looking to revamp a little bit. Okay. So part of this is lower priority than some of the migration pieces that I mentioned on the legacy connector deprecation. But we do have a converter that supports, I guess, a significant portion of the classic workflows that are out there and can help move, just if you're not interested in rewriting dozens of lines of classic workflow pieces, this converter can definitely help with that. So looking to make some aspects of that more visible as well, just on, more than just, the recommendation to use Cloudflows. We want to make sure that you can actually make that transition as easy as possible without, having to go rewrite everything from scratch and everything goes with that.
Good. Last question I have is, what questions are you seeing most coming from the community around, Dataverse Connector? What are you seeing the most, and do you have any answers to any of those?
Definitely. And we do see, tons of community feedback and engagement on our Power Automate Ideas community and our Power Automate Building Flows community and those other spots. So thank you for everyone who participates and help answer questions in those forums. I'd say some of the top requests we're hearing are looking for ways to make it easier to embed flows in Dynamics apps and model different Power Apps, more than just that flow menu, being able to, say just this flow from just this context, make it easier, kind of an easier commanding experience for parts of that integration. We've heard a lot of feedback on bulk migration support. As an admin, how do I move from the legacy connectors, making that easier? So as part of the documentation that I mentioned on the migration pieces, we are looking to publish a few scripts for admins as well that can help use the existing, that migration assistant experience that I mentioned. We want to share some additional tools for admins that can help make that a little bit easier when you have many flows that you're looking at in your organization and you want to understand which are in scope and, which can be moved using that tool and things offhand. And in general, just other usability pieces are the main, definitely some of the most challenging feedback we hear around lookups and just all those cliffs on, now I need to go research OData, now I need to, learn new syntax, or how do I get this exact internal name or expansion query? And I did want to give another shout out to one of our, community members, Dana Cahill, who has a incredible Dataverse Connector cheat sheet that you may have seen online. It highlights every action, every trigger in a very clear way. So shout out to Dana for making such a great resource for the community. But that has, I'd say, a very comprehensive view over how to use the Dataverse Connector and really an overview of everything we're looking to improve. Yeah. You shouldn't need a giant PDF to understand how to use this thing. So we are trying to make progress on all these aspects on the connector. So those are the main pieces I wanted to call out.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we put links to Danny's resource in there as well. But Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure and really informative. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. If there's a guest you'd like to see on the show from Microsoft, please message me on LinkedIn. If you want to be a supporter of the show, please check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 Guy. How will you create on the Power Platform today? Ciao.